Hi, everyone. This is Jen again from the city of Kingston, just with an update. We have 15 people who are joining us online on Zoom, and we have approximately 25 to 30 people here at the Calvin Park Public Library. As you joined the meeting this evening, you would have received a fun automated voice that said that this meeting is recorded and it's also being live streamed on YouTube. Hello again. This is Jen from the city of Kingston. Everybody here has settled in person. We have 14 people who have joined us here online, and Tim Park, Security Agral, and Tim. Oh,
Okay. Thank you, everybody online and in person. We're going to get this information session underway. My name is Autumn Hume. I'm a communications officer with the city's communications and public engagement division. I'll be facilitating tonight's public information session. Tonight's event, as I mentioned to the crowd here, is a hybrid one, which means you have folks joining us online and in person at the Calvin Park Library branch. Thank you to everyone in attendance tonight for making the time. We have approximately 26 people in person here at the library and about 15 people joining us on Zoom. For folks at the library, again, please note the webcam on the front is recording audio for Zoom. We kindly ask you to bear that in mind. For those online, this session is being live streamed on YouTube. For privacy, we've turned off cameras and microphones. Because the session is being live streamed to our YouTube channel and recorded, if you have to leave early, want to revisit part of the presentation, or share a link with a friend, you can rewatch the entire session on our channel. The handle is at the City of Kingston. We'll also add that link into the chat for you. Just gonna advance a couple slides. So sometimes technology troubles happen. Here we have a list of there's a list of common challenges available on Get Involved Kingston. You can also adjust your view options at home so that you can see both the presentation and members of the project team at the same time. If your internet connection goes down, you can call to the meeting at the number on the screen. We'll give you a moment to write it down just in case you need to use it. We'll do our best to help you with any technical problems, but sometimes the easiest way to resolve issues is to log out of Zoom and rejoin the meeting. You can do that with your registration confirmation email. Again, a reminder that you can also follow live on YouTube. Our handle again is at the City of Kingston. Tonight's event features a short presentation followed by a question and answer opportunity. For those of you here in person, please write down any questions you have during the presentation on one of the comment cards just at the table over there and drop them off over here. And there will be a chance to verbally ask a question as well. Project team will address questions received during the question and answer portion towards the end. For those of you online, please use Zoom's Q&A feature to ask questions. The Q&A feature can be found on the bar across the bottom of the screen. To ask a question, just type it into the question area. Please note, if we don't get to all of the questions tonight, we will follow up. Questions and answers will be summarized by the project team and sent out to attendees afterwards. The guidelines for participation are now on the screen. These are the City of Kingston's guidelines for ensuring that everyone is able to participate fairly. Just give you a moment to review them. Excellent, thank you. We'll now turn things over to the Manager of Policy Planning, Sukriti Agarwal, from the City's Planning Services to walk us through a short presentation. Sukriti, it's all yours.
Thanks, Autumn, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening to continue the conversation for the Wright Crescent area. My name is Sukriti Agarwal and I'm the Manager of Policy Planning, and I'm joined here today by my colleagues Tim Park, who is the Director of Planning Services. Yes, absolutely, for sure. I start over again. My name is Sukriti Agarwal. I'm the Manager of Policy Planning with the Planning Services Department, and I'm joined here by Tim Park, Director of Planning Services, and Chris Vicka, Senior Planner, also with Planning Services. And we also have Jen Pinarski and Autumn Hume from our Communications Department, who are helping facilitate the online session on Zoom. Next slide, please. So, and I'm going to invite Chris to take us through the presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'll try and project for the folks in the back there. Is this okay? Great. Okay. Hopefully not too loud for the folks at home. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. We appreciate you coming tonight and spending your time with us. It looks like a beautiful evening outside, so I know there are other places you could be, and you're here with us, so we appreciate your time. Next slide, please. So the subject properties for this evening are 4 specific properties. They are the Kingston Alliance Church at 540 Palace Road, the Anguanada Center at 114 Wright Crescent, YMCA at 100 Wright Crescent, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church at 66 Wright Crescent. Excuse me. These were identified as part of the City of Kingston growth strategy. These were identified specifically for intensification, which the City of Kingston they ran the Central Kingston growth strategy as part of a broader project intended to look at infill and intensification opportunities around the city. The CKGS is what we call it. It came into being because of some of the different residential areas in Kingston that were facing pretty significant amounts of pressure for infill development. And this resulted in development that was really concerning to some members of the public regarding the potential impact in terms of the built form that was being proposed in these areas. and they were feeling in some instances like it was changing the character of the affected neighborhoods. So the Central Kingston Growth Strategy was undertaken to help understand this and potentially direct growth to places where it was considered appropriate. So the three primary areas that were considered for intensification through the CKGS were in the vicinity of Brock and Johnson Streets, and in the Portsmouth Avenue area, specifically down towards King Street, and also in the Wright Crescent area. And these areas were identified mainly because they have a variety, they have a real mix of residential and commercial and institutional uses in those specific parts of the city. So the previously proposed provisions through the Central Kingston Growth Strategy that were put out for comment in terms of the Wright Crescent area, they included the potential for, you'll probably remember this well, for towers along Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard and along Bath Road as well, along those frontages, with a maximum of 12 stories for those towers. And then that was to transition downwards with a maximum height of 6 stories proposed along the Wright Crescent frontage. So there would be transition from the high-rise buildings to the existing townhouse development in the central area of Wright Crescent. So these recommendations were proposed to be implemented through the citywide bylaw, which I'm going to get to in just a moment. But through our community consultation exercises, it was decided that that area, the Wright Crescent area, was to be removed from as one of the intensification areas within CKGS, and that we would be looking at that in greater detail. So the new zoning bylaw was presented to Planning Committee, and it was passed in April of 2022. And following the resolution of a couple of Ontario Land Tribunal appeals, it's now in force and effect. The next slide, please. So going back to what I mentioned earlier, in response to the concerns that had been raised previously as part of the CKGS, the staff held an engagement session in April of 2022 to discuss concerns, etc., and also committed to additional consultation with residents before bringing forward any other specific official plan amendments or zoning bylaw amendments for this specific area. So I recognize some of your faces as well from July. We had a walking tour in July where we went around the neighborhood, and that was another opportunity for folks in a little more casual environment to point out things that they liked and didn't like. And so that exchange of ideas was very helpful for us as well, in terms of also gathering your thoughts and concerns about what's happening in terms of development potential in this area. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we heard coming out of those two sessions, the earlier engagement session and the walking tour, were the following. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it's kind of the main points. We heard about a lack of engagement with area residents. And that, as you've heard already, resulted in proposed changes in terms of the Wright Crescent area being withheld from the process that was in place previously, and that further engagement and consideration was provided through the separate processes, including tonight. There's concern about the proposed heights and discussion about where would be appropriate areas for additional height. There was concern about a loss of green space. And one thing especially that struck us during the walking tour was people's concerns also about loss of mature trees. So we certainly heard that as a result of new development. And I want to emphasize that that's generally speaking loss of green space and trees on private lands. There was concern about the potential for traffic impacts as well, vehicular traffic impacts on Wright Crescent. There was concern about the impact from a servicing perspective, and fears that they would outstrip the capacity that's available, both in terms of existing development that's here and future development. There was also concern about a loss of local community amenities and services. You're very well served here with the YMCA. I was there a couple of times in January myself. It's very great. And obviously as well, we have members in attendance as well from two of the churches that are mentioned as the subject properties. So assurance was given by the city that it would be ultimately up to the landowners to choose whether or not the properties are to redevelop. That's not for us to say specifically. And one of the things also that we brought forward was that community center and place of worship as uses would continue to be permitted through the new zoning bylaw, and that is currently in place. In addition, there were questions raised about whether it's appropriate to put development in this location or whether it should go in other areas of the city. And I assure you that we regularly are looking at all parts of the city in terms of development potential. And I just want to note as well there that many of the areas that were suggested were in fact areas that are not specifically designated for residential development. So that's something we have to consider as well. So overall, again, as a result of the feedback that we received through the community consultation, it was decided to remove Wright Crescent entirely from the CKGS recommendations and the new zoning bylaw. There are a couple seats up here in the front if you like.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. So next slide, please. So I want to lay out a little bit of context here in terms of the planning world that we work within. So in broad terms, we deal with different levels of planning, and our powers are given to us by the province. So at the highest level is provincial legislation, specifically most often referred to from us as the Planning Act. Obviously, there are other pieces of legislation as well that affect us, but we look mainly to the Planning Act for guidance. More specific beyond that, the province provides land use directions through something called the Provincial Policy Statement, and that is a document that sets the rules for land use planning in Ontario. And it's a broad variety of policies that cover things like managing growth, the use and management of natural resources, protecting the environment, public health and safety, this kind of thing. It's broad statements, and everything has to be in compliance with that. So at the municipal level then, we are dealing with our key policy document being the official plan. And that is the document that the city writes up and sets out its land use planning goals through that. And that's what we use to guide physical development in the city, protection of natural and cultural heritage, our resource management, and the kind of necessary supporting infrastructure around that. We look at this document every day. So the official plan is something that we use, that it recognizes specifically that there are a broad variety of land use types across the city, whether it's urban or suburban, or rural or agricultural, all kinds of different types, the environmental features, etc. And that is really the document that we use as a blueprint to guide development for the next 20 years. Now, we are required under the Planning Act to revisit this often and make sure that it's considered current. And we're going to be getting to that point pretty soon. So below the official plan in that hierarchy are the zoning bylaws, and the zoning bylaws define specific uses and standards for all properties, and that effectively translates into the way that buildings are positioned on a lot, setbacks, that kind of thing, and also the height. It gives all the specifics around how a piece of land can be used. So as you've heard me mention, we had a very extensive period of consultation and review of that new zoning bylaw. It was a consolidation of a number of zoning bylaws that go back to basically when I was born. They've been around for a very long time. They have now effectively all been repealed, and the new zoning bylaw is in place for all but specific areas that are defined as not subject to this bylaw. And if you care to look at mapping online, which we're very happy to direct you to, you can see how all the properties across the city are zoned and where the old bylaws are actually still in force. There are good reasons for that I won't go into, but I'm very happy to answer that as well. So again, going back to CKGS for a moment, for the Wright Crescent area, there were different options that were initially proposed for the zoning of the 4 properties that I mentioned right off the top there. So as I've mentioned, we've heard what folks have been concerned about, and they were withdrawn. And so what has effectively happened is that the equivalent zones for what were in place previously for that, what was the previous zoning for this area was from zoning bylaw 8499, and the new zoning bylaw, which is 2022-62, that one effectively has brought forward the previous zoning. So what was in place is effectively still in place. Obviously, some minor adjustments have to happen to make it basically fit with the new, but it's effectively the same. Take a moment. So another important, there are a couple of other considerations, as you can see here, that I wanted to talk about. One being a real change in the landscape of planning here in Ontario, and that is Bill 23. So on November 28th of 2022, the provincial government passed Bill 23, which is otherwise known as the More Homes Built Faster Act. and this has a broad effect on our planning world. So the kind of sweeping changes that we're looking at include things like limits on architectural design and on heritage, changes to the way that we deal with that. There are changes to the way development is paid for, changes to appeal rights, and broad permissions, for example, for intensification on existing properties. So some of this is already in effect, and some of it is still coming into force. We're waiting for things called OREGs, which provide further guidance and lay out the specifics of how some of this planning is to come into effect through the municipality. And this is also following on from a previous bill as well, called Bill 109, which was the More Homes for Everyone Act, and that was passed in April of 2022 as well. And that was already bringing about a lot of changes in terms of the timing and fees for development applications, which doesn't sound very exciting, but it has a very broad impact on the way, again, that we have to manage affairs as planners in the city. So another part of this as well is, as I mentioned before, the province has this provincial policy statement, and we are anticipating that a new provincial policy statement is going to be coming to us as well. And we're expecting that in the summer sometime. Obviously, that's dictated by the province. And again, like I said, because there is a hierarchy, ultimately anything kind of below that, see our official plan, will need to be in compliance with the provincial policy statement. So that leads on to the next part, which is the municipal comprehensive review of our official plan. So as I mentioned, there are these legislative requirements that we revisit our official plan every few years. And we're at that point now. So we have undertaken, we've started, we're on the cusp of doing this municipal comprehensive review, which effectively means that we're going to be undertaking a number of different studies to help guide the future development of the official plan, which again informs the development of the entire city. So this kind of in-depth analysis includes things like population, employment, and housing studies, commercial land study, employment lands, otherwise known as industrial land studies. It looks at servicing and density and transportation. It really takes a holistic view of the way that development is happening in the city, so that we know that as we update the official plan, that it is capturing the current thinking and planning and is moving us forward in a positive way as a city. And like I mentioned as well, that specifically, that official plan update is going to be also informed by this provincial policy statement that we're awaiting from the provincial government. So that's a lot of background. Next slide, please. Where does it go? Well, given the feedback that we've received to date from the community, the takeaway message from tonight is that we're not proposing any amendments to the zoning. Not at all. We're going to leave it as is right now. And so effectively, there are two avenues that there could be for a future change to the area. One would be the official plan update that I mentioned, which is frankly a short years-long process. So we're just getting started it now, and I would project that it will be at least a couple of years before we have an official plan, a new draft of the official plan in place. And that is something that there are going to be lots of opportunities again for members of the public to comment on a citywide basis, and thus also in your specific neighborhoods. And then, so that official plan update, one of the things that obviously we're going to be doing as we continue to do, and as we are being directed to do by the province, is to determine appropriate locations for higher density residential development. And then the other avenue for potential change is site-specific development application. And that would mean if one, for example, of the 4 properties that we've been talking about was sold or whatnot, or they were exploring whatever development potential they wanted to for their own lands, anyone has the ability to submit a development application to be considered by the city. And I can tell you that at this time, we have no such development applications for the 4 parcels. We technically pre-application process is in place, and it's a confidential process, but I can also tell you that in fact there are no pre-applications in place. So we have nothing on the books right now in terms of development for the 4 parcels that brought you here in general tonight. So just one last thing I wanted to mention on that is that in both the processes that I did mention already, but there is extensive potential for public consultation in those processes. So this is certainly not your last opportunity to comment on what's happening in your neighborhood. Next slide, please. So short but sweet, we thank you very much for joining us tonight. And if you have comments or thoughts that you'd like to share that you don't necessarily want to share with the group, you're certainly welcome to reach out by email and contact us. We'd love to hear it. We can, if you feel the need, we can certainly set up individual meetings or whatnot to listen to your concerns. So that is the end of our formal presentation. We're very happy to take questions. We're going to be taking questions alternately if they're available from the online session and also from our in-person session here. So if you have a question and you are online, please submit it to the question and answer forum, and our esteemed colleagues from communications will be helping us with that. If you're here in person, just please raise your hand and we'll do our best to make sure we get you in turn. And again, just please be mindful of the guidelines that we have in terms of public participation. We appreciate, we would like to be able to hear everyone's opinions. So thank you again very much for your attention, and we'll open the question period now.
Good. Okay, so we're going to start first with a question from online. We have Josephine who writes, why did the CKGS not consider properties zoned other than residential for intensification? This is what we were specifically told. It seems there are many suitable locations that are zoned commercial or industrial.
I can speak to that. And thank you for that question. So the Central Kingston Growth Strategy only included lands that were designated for residential development in the city and as directed by council. Mm-hmm. And just a little bit of background on why those were chosen. That was because of the consideration of an interim control bylaw, which would have frozen any type of development within the Sydenham, Portsmouth, and Williamsville electoral district. So it kind of came out of residential development pressures that these three electoral districts were facing. So the intent of this study was only to look at residentially designated lands. However, as Chris mentioned, we will be starting the review of our official plan. And through that, we are going to be reviewing other areas. So not only residentially designated lands, but for example, lands that are currently designated for commercial uses, and is there the opportunity to change our policies to allow for residential in those areas.
Just to follow along from what Sukriti is saying, I know you're not all planners, so, fair enough. It's okay. You'll get there. A key difference in terms is that when we talk about something being designated, again, that's related to the official plan. It is a policy designation. It's a broader citywide kind of designation, and it's harder to change. It's more expensive to change. And so the zoning, if we talk about what a property is zoned, that is again through the zoning bylaw. So a property will have a designation and a zoning. And most often those things correspond. Sometimes they actually do kind of become uncoupled over time. And that's one of the things we've been doing through the recent zoning bylaw update as well. So part of the reason that CKGS was focused not on lands designated other than residential was it was kind of staying within its lane. It was the CKGS was related to zoning and the new zoning bylaw, not trying to change the official plan, which is a document in the hierarchy above it. Hopefully that adds to the context.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris.
There was a question in the front here, I think, first.
For sure. We'll start there.
Hi. At what point does the city notify a community that an application has come forward for development? At what point does the community become aware that there is an interest in a property and that an application has been made?
Yeah, so when an application is submitted to the city has 30 days to deem it complete. So basically what that means is to make sure that we have received all studies and drawings that are needed to support that application. Once the city deems that application complete, the city has 15 days to notify any property owners within 120 meters of that subject property, depending on the type of application. A minor variance, for example, only requires notification to owners within 60 meters of a property. However, a zoning bylaw amendment would require notification to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands. So that's kind of the timeline we're looking at is 15 days from when the city deems an application complete. So at that time, a notice is mailed out to all property owners within the 120-meter radius, and then a sign is also put up on the site. And then when a public meeting date is finalized, the sign is updated with that meeting date.
Quick plug for the city's website as well. We have something called Dash, our Development and Services Hub, and it gives you the ability to see all active development applications across the city. And you can kind of click on a blue dot and go down a couple of layers into it and find all the supporting documentation for that particular development application. So planning studies, traffic studies, everything that has been provided that is part of the complete application is available to the public for review.
Thank you. So we have a few more questions in person than we do online right now, so we'll take another one in person. I think we're going to work left to right here. So
I was just wondering, can you tell us what the current zoning bylaw is for our properties in Wright Crescent? Are they going to put us in a worse position than what one would have done?
The current, I'll answer that.
Sure.
So for the YMCA, it is literally the exact same zoning that it was before. In fact, if you look at the properties on a map,
That's what I'm asking.
yeah.
What is the zoning? What is the
So-
zoning on that property?
so I can tell you it's called a B1, I think it's B1361 zone. The B1 is a parent zone, and that refers to multi-residential housing and a variety of other uses, including the YMCA, which is currently there. The other properties, when they were brought from the previous bylaw, in the previous bylaw, they were in the B1 parent zone that I was referring to, that multi-residential zone. When they were brought into the new zoning bylaw, they were reclassified. It's just a different term, like all the terms kind of changed, but it is something we now call the URM4 zone. It's an urban residential multi-4 zone.
So
and-
how tall can the buildings?
Well, in fact, there is not a height limit specifically on it.
So we're worse off than what we would have been if they did bylaw.
Well, the new one, so it's, this
So
is,
they could put 12-story buildings on right, 12-story buildings on back, not have setbacks, not have the funny thing where the first few floors can only be certain height. Like,
so just for the folks at home, if you couldn't hear that, there's just concern about the way that future development might happen. And in effect, you're right, like there are different ways of achieving the same goals in planning. And what has been carried forward because the CKGS recommendations weren't taken up was the old zoning and the older way of doing things. And there are setback requirements in that and limitations in the way that something can be built. It does not specify a height, that is true, but it doesn't mean that there are no parameters for development. They're there.
it could end up 12-story, 13, 14, 50.
It really depends on a lot of like the size of the lot and other factors together.
The density.
Yeah, the density as well. And so, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, on each property, there's a density assigned as well, which is really going to drive the number of units that can go there. You then start factoring in the setbacks and all the other things that are in the zoning bylaw. So it may sound like there's the ceiling's the limit. It's not. There are still constraints.
I did like the idea when I went back and read some of the other information we got, where you can only have so many stories at the front, and then the next it has to be set back from that, and makes the building a lot less tall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that over the new stuff on.
We're on thank you, on Williamsville on Princess Street. That's what we've started to do. I'll call it the next generation, as opposed to the first builds on Princess Street. So,
Much better than a
yeah.
square
and that's
block.
the sort of thing we can do through design. Like a good building is really determined by good design. And we learn as we go along, and we're trying to bring these things forward.
thank you. We're going to switch to online for a second. We have a comment from Jordan, who writes, "We need intensification, especially in such close proximity to grocery stores and public transit hubs. This area is a perfect location for intensification. Neighborhoods evolve. We are in a housing crisis. The vacancy rate in Kingston is 1.2%. We need housing like this in locations like this, and we need it as soon as possible. I lived in the neighborhood for 12 years. The neighborhood needs this sort of intensification. The city needs it. Housing is a public good and it is desperately needed. Stop listening to self-interested individuals who oppose all change and suggest it should be built elsewhere. We can't let self-interested individuals prevent meeting this public good. Thank you for the comment, Jordan. We'll take a quick question from here. Thank you.
I'm a resident of the townhouse condominium complex next door. A couple of things. I think one of the questions about heights under the old bylaws. The reason everything was repealed is because there was lack of in-person consultation prior to the GS study, and yet we were in this area then raised the big ones. There have been rumors, and this is what I think people are worried about, is that Homestead is currently in discussions with the buyer about buying the property. So there's the concern about what might go there. The other concern was about not considering other areas nearby, even if they weren't zoned residential. And again, the rumor mill, while we do know the sign that the Canadian Tire on the corner over there is going to be building in that big bare spot in the Kingston Center area. And the question I had asked about was, why can't you build a huge complexes where the old Canadian Tires have been up there, right? And rumor has it that there is a plan for that.
I can speak to
And
that.
so I think that was and because it was non-residential, it wasn't taken into consideration in any of the intensification. But it's so close, that would have a big impact on decisions here.
Yeah.
Then the last thing I want to notice is that the 11 and 27 Wright Crescent developments have not been completed, and people were concerned about further intensification until we had time to wait and see how the traffic patterns with that many residents in this area, and to watch how, and because each one was granted fewer than required parking spaces, you can already see when you drove in what the parking's like. And we were never told in that development that one end of Wright Crescent was going to be sealed off for over a year. And again, lack of information. You can see now from our property how imposing that 6-story building is going to be. And people also had concerns about what was supposed to leave the play area is a playpen patch of grass now. And everyone here has trust issues with planning now because of the size of that stamped area, the play area. And so I think this is where some of the concerns come from, are the rumor mills, and also some of the concerns and issues we had with the development that we have not been able to.
And the number of trees.
Okay. There's a lot in there. Okay. So,
You want to do,
no,
you got them all?
I got them all.
Okay.
Rumors are rumors. Okay, I can assure you, as Chris did during his presentation, there has been no interest or activity brought to our attention of any of the properties that were in the presentation, which includes pre-app, pre-app zoning amendments, committee of adjustment. That's not to say at some point in time we may receive an application. Property owners are within their right to do that. At this point in time, I can unequivocally say we have received nothing. Developers don't come in and tell us that, oh, we've got an option on this property. We find out when they submit the application. So that's all it is right now, are rumors. I can't substantiate them. So they'll have to remain in that sort of realm. As for across the street on the Canadian Tire site, the current official plan designation on that site would not allow residential on there. It's a commercial district.
It's a district commercial site, so for any residential, they would need to put in an application to the city.
To amend the official plan. So at this point, you could not get residential on there. That is not to say, through the review of the official plan coming up, it may be visited that perhaps some residential would be compatible over there. But we'd have to undertake, as Secrety and Chris did through their presentations, there's a series of studies about employment, about housing, that we have to look at before those decisions are made. And it is all part of a public process that you would be able to come out to and share the input on. In terms of the 7 and 11 Wright, about no development taking place until those buildings are completed. At this point in time, there is no other development proposed in the neighborhood. And even if there was an application to come in tomorrow, by the time it went through the process, the last building would be finished construction and traffic patterns would begin to establish in a normal manner. Unfortunately, one of the side effects of construction sites are the operation of works that go around them. And sometimes that means closing off of public streets. In this case, it was done to ensure public safety as well as the traffic flow on Palace remained in a safe manner. It's a temporary measure and it will end when the construction ends. Okay. And as far, I can't really comment on the aspects someone raised there at the last about the trees. That is something that does happen, unfortunately, through development on private property that we can only regulate to a certain degree with replanting of vegetation on the site. Okay. But the trees that were removed from there, the developer did have to provide tree compensation. It goes into the trees, a city's tree reserve, and new trees are planted throughout the city.
Hardly replaces an old tree.
No, it doesn't. And this is a debate I hear all the time, and I understand that. But we can't say you just stop development. All the places we all live right now had trees on them at some point. Okay. I think that was most of it.
Thank you. We're just gonna go to the online question real quick, then we'll come back to the room. Harold asks, this may be an irrelevant question coming from a geriatric. What process do you follow in reaching out to who you consult? Example, do you work with your statisticians to figure out who is where and what communications capabilities they have?
For planning for actual development applications, we do a hard copy mail out. However, for many of our policy projects, we typically use the newspaper and the city's website, sometimes curb signs to advertise a study or to advertise a public engagement event. We don't have a statistician who we don't have that at the city who can guide us about like who lives in a particular area or what would be other options. But we also work collaboratively with our communication staff as well to look at new ways of engaging our residents, whether it's online or through in-person events or surveys and things like that.
And I think just to add to that, all the documentations that are either reports that go to committee or council are access available for visually impaired on the city's website.
So I'm going to come back to you, and we should have some questions waiting over here.
Thank you. I also live in one of the townhouses, and so I just wanted to. My question actually was asked, but brilliant, but I wanted to add to, because I didn't hear a response in the issue around the green space and the park for the two buildings
Yeah,
that
yeah.
have been made, and so we're putting 160 apartments, residents of 160 apartments. And they do have a postage stamp size
Yeah.
green space. And what the part of the concern there I feel is that, and it is a trust issue, is that the design is very different from what we saw at City Hall, however many years ago that was, in a presentation where there were walk-ups off of Palace Road and that type of entrances, setbacks that you had expressed as the new build on Williamsville, but they disappeared, that disappeared. So anyway, that's more a comment. I think everybody that I've spoken to in our neighborhood, we know it is a good location and we agree that some intensification, we do have housing crisis. We just I'll go back to a comment that Chris made earlier. We want to direct growth as appropriate where it's appropriate.
Yep.
And so I think it's the as appropriate is what we're looking for in the comment that we're making. So my question, sorry to take a minute to get to it, is what happens to all the feedback that we've given you in terms of the official plan? Because I know there was a lot of feedback there was a lot of work put into it by a fair number of people, your team included, and thank you so much for that, because it was good to feel that we were being heard.
Yeah.
But what happens to all that now? Like I'm just concerned that we're going to be asked to do it all again.
Okay,
And so,
that's a fair question. I think, what's the result? Wright Crescent got pulled out of
Yes.
CKGS. We're here again, having a meeting with you to hear and report back to you. So the dialogue continues. I think the comments that you previously provided, Chris outlined in his presentation. And as we do move forward with the official plan, and we do look at the other areas in the city or in the abutting area, if we are going to recommend any sort of intensification or development, we know the issues that you brought to our attention: traffic infiltration, height, the proximity of buildings to the what I'll call the interior, the Wright Crescent aspect. You also mentioned about the loss of open space. We're constrained to a certain degree, obviously, on what we can get through development. That's all guided by the Planning Act. Residential development is limited to, under the Planning Act, we were only allowed to ask for 5% of a site. Hence the postage stamp you have on the end of the building, which was deemed to be better than nothing. It was either that or we took what's called cash in, which is the cash equivalent.
well, you did take that. Cash was given.
Okay, so there might have been a combination of that on there.
But the cash in lieu doesn't address the situation for the veterans, right?
No, what that, again, it's similar to the tree fund, is that money does go into a reserve. And then the city can only use it to purchase and acquire new parkland. Now, the amount of cash in lieu that is collected over the city doesn't add up to a huge amount when you factor in land values. And if we make one big purchase, it pretty well drains that reserve. So again, that's a very sort of strategic, where do you purchase it and what are your opportunities for that?
And as just to add on to that, our park staff look across the city at the different levels of servicing in terms of parks and try and understand where there is a greater need. And sometimes that's where they'll focus the monies, but then also we understand where there are development impacts, and we're very cognizant of trying to find opportunities there for creating new parks. Problem is that we can only work within active parcels, right? Like, we're not going to expropriate someone's land in order to make a park. We might, if a new development comes up and there's an opportunity to create a park, we might seize that opportunity. There might be like a land exchange or something, who knows? Obviously, that's more difficult in the urban areas of the city where a lot of things are more static. So we really try and find the opportunities where we can, but it is difficult aligning all those different things.
It's just to follow up on the question about the green space and the parks. Okay. in the development, what became agreeable with the 11 and 27 was that they were going to be planting bushes and a large number of new trees. Once the development is finished, if they don't do that, what happens? Like, does the city have a recourse to go after them? Because of what we've seen at 27 Wright Crescent, we've sort of been laughing about. What they do is they have some landscaper come in, they shove in a bunch of bushes, and then they don't water them or anything, and they all die.
Okay.
Right? And you can't do that with new bushes and trees. So what recourse does the city have when the developer doesn't follow through on the?
Absolutely. Another really good question. So this is part of our world. It's called, we have in Kingston, and most municipalities have what's called a site plan control bylaw. And most developments have to apply and get site plan development, enter into a site plan agreement with the city. Now, what that site plan agreement does is it's a number of things, but it's basically how the site works in terms of traffic flow, to make sure that there is adequate amenity space provided on the site where they said it would be provided, where the parking is located, where the fire lane is located, where the garbage pickup is located. Also part of that is a landscaping plan. Okay, and that landscaping plan is submitted to us with a planting plan, and it states that they will plant this here and there. They have to provide securities with that agreement. Okay. And in order to get those securities back, they apply to the city. We go out and inspect, and we reduce it to a certain amount once we're satisfied that they've completed what they said they would do on the plan. A year later, they can come back and get the remainder back. But I can hear you going, okay, that's great, but what if in 5 years all the trees die? We've still got this agreement registered on title against the property that says you agreed to plant these. We can go back to them and say, you need to replant all these dead trees. Okay, and we can go on the tax roll if necessary to do it. Now, all that lovely explanation. Let's go back to Bill 23 that the provincial government just passed. One of the things they passed under that bill is we're no longer allowed to ask for landscaping or any sort of material, I guess, commitment on how a building will look anymore. We no longer have those powers. So write your MPP.
This is a follow-on question about 27 Wright Crescent and the parcel of land that the city bought for $1 million from the sisters. Now, you might not be able to answer this question, but what did the city sell the land to the developer for? How was that arranged? You don't have to answer that now, but I've been wondering how that transaction worked. And the other thing is, there was an opportunity when the city owned that land to have a park, to make arrangements for a park, because the property belonged to the city.
I'm not aware of what the transaction was involved around that property. It predated me. I'm sure there were reports that went to council about that. And they're at the point now that if at the point they were reported out, they were confidential. They should be available now under freedom of information if you want the terms and conditions in there. But I'm not privy to them. I don't know what they were or the decision making behind them.
But there was an opportunity then to make provision for a park.
There may have been, but I'm not sure why they ended up going the route they did. I know Kingston Frontenac Housing was in the picture, so that might have been part of it. I don't know.
Thank you. We'll take one more question. You've been waiting, and then we'll move on from
Oh, sorry. As a rule, how long does the process from the initial application to the actual start of build take
How long is a piece of string?
There's a lot of variables in there.
Is it 6 months? Is
Oh,
it 3
it-
years?
In a perfect world, if it was a zoning application, I would say 9 to 12 months in a perfect world. But if you get an application that comes in and there's a lot of community input or a lot of technical issues that need to be resolved, and there's a lot of back and forth between the applicant and the city until we get to the point where everybody's satisfied, that can push it out sometimes to 2 years, I've seen.
2 years. Well, I was hoping for 5.
So if I could add to what Tim just mentioned there, one of the confounding variables for a lot of development is appeal, being appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And again, one of the changes that we've just seen, I did mention this in the presentation, but one of the changes through Bill 23 is that there are no longer rights of appeal for members of the public for official plan amendments or zoning bylaw. Sorry, opposite, got that wrong. For minor variances and consents, only for zoning bylaw amendments and official plan
Yeah,
amendments.
they
So-
actually, you're right, they originally did propose no
They did
appeals to
for everything.
zoning amendment, but
Yeah.
they realized they were gonna get a lot of pushback from the public on that, so they reinstated that.
So the upside of that is that because developers know that they cannot be appealed for a minor variance or a consent application, we'll speak specifically about minor variances. Minor variance, again, is just a change to the existing zoning, usually some relief for one of the numbers that's already in the zoning. Anyway, because they know that they will not be able to be appealed for that, then strategically some developers might come much closer to the zoning than they might otherwise and request a minor variance if they need to. Like every parcel is different, and it's very common for us to get minor variances so that something specific can be accommodated. But we'll see what we haven't had a lot of the feedback loop hasn't been short enough now for that one for us to be able to understand the implications, but we'll see what happens.
Thank you. We just have 2 quick comments coming in from online and a question, and then we'll come back to the room. So Howard comments, we are shifting from an industrial age to a post-industrial world. Large areas for 19th century railway stations and World War II aircraft factories are now redundant. Just because a site is zoned as commercial no longer means that it must remain so. A much more serious need is for the tree canopy in combination with housing to both house people and reduce the effects of global warming. We have another comment from Alex, who writes, I agree with Howard. Self-interest is not the loss of community resources like the YMCA that provides daycare and recreation to many local families, the church that helps our local unhoused population, or the community gardens. The drilling and construction that would go on for years would interrupt the last years of many local seniors on Wright. This was an appropriate decision for the neighborhood. And we have a question from Harold, who asks, in amongst all of this, bylaws, processes, etc., does the Indigenous voice get heard? Question about Indigenous representation.
Yes, so for very large projects, so for example, for our official plan review, we do reach out to Indigenous nations specifically, seeking any feedback from them. For site-specific development applications, although there is no requirement by the planning legislation to consult, however, we do seek, anybody is welcome to comment on a development application regardless of where they live or regardless of, for example, if they're in the neighborhood. And we do hear a lot from our urban Indigenous community on some site-specific applications. Also, a lot of our working groups that are created for large-scale land use policy projects have Indigenous representation in them.
Thank you. We're going to bring it back to the room here. So take a question.
Yes, I do. When you say that the Wright Crescent portion of the project has been withdrawn, is that a temporary reprieve, or what would make it, what would be the factors that would contribute to a reversal of that decision?
So the Wright Crescent proposal under the Central Kingston growth strategy has been pulled out. what we are saying is, as we are going through the comprehensive official plan review, we're looking at the entire city. And it may be determined that across at the commercial center or at the intersection of Sir John A. and Bath, that might be an appropriate area for intensification under certain conditions, which again, hearing feedback from previously meeting with you, traffic infiltration, height, things like that, that we will take into consideration. Again, it will be all a public process. There will be time for input. So if we were say to come back and say, you know what, we do feel we could support some density along Sir John A at this height, you would have your opportunity to come out and say, you know what, still a bit high for me, I don't like it, but if you maybe could do it this way, I could maybe live with it. I don't think it's going to necessarily be that nothing is going to be looked at. We have large blocks of land in here. It's just what's the appropriate development.
If I may just add on to what Tim said there as well, and this is risks oversimplification, but three of the things that we very regularly look at are proximity to express transit and proximity to commercial uses where people could access goods and services on a daily basis, and proximity to parkland and open space. And so we are trying to create in Kingston more walkable communities so that people are not car dependent. And so frankly, some of those factors that I just mentioned are in this area, as they are in other areas across the city. And so oftentimes those will be looked at as areas of priority. That's part of the reason that it was selected in the first place to be included in this Central Kingston growth strategy. It's because you can see why it would be attractive for lots of people to live in this area, as you already know.
And just to add to that, if we do change the zoning or the policies for this area, like as I think you had mentioned in the back there, like we have all of your comments from previous consultations. So it's not that we are throwing out any of the previous work that was done. So we still have all of the feedback that was provided to us that we will take into consideration going forward.
Frankly, if that feedback that you give though, like it informs us of the general public sentiment, right? And so we take that and we apply it broadly. We obviously say, well, we heard from the folks at Wright Crescent this, and so it's, not to take away from your individuality, but the thoughts you're having are not unique to yourselves. They are certainly sentiments that we encounter across the city. And so we have to come up with creative solutions for how to deal with that everywhere.
So we're gonna work the room to go right to the left here.
Hi, thanks to the developer's friend Doug Ford, he changed, I guess it was number 23. He took a lot of things, they took a lot of things from you, the ability to help shape the buildings. Did they give you anything?
Deafening silence. What are we going to do? We work within the policy.
I'm making a statement, but I'm also.
We're being recorded here. What I can say is I've been doing this for a while, and I don't think I've experienced as many changes in the last 2 years in Planning Act legislation than I have in my whole career.
Thank you. We know why.
It's aggressive. There are some points that I'm trying to put a positive light to. I think it's put all municipalities in the position of having to rethink how they process development applications and how they can be more efficient. And let's face it, we get into a routine. We can always improve our game. And as a result of this, we're having to do that. So for that, we're being poked to do it. I think it's a good thing. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So I will give kudos to. I will give points for providing more housing. I think my comment further to that is I wish they would have been more definitive on the type of housing, such as, purpose-built rental housing. Because that's really kind of what we need. And that would have given us a little bit more of a support than what we need. So we're kind of, and it's interesting because I mean, I sit on panel with the regional planning commissioners of Ontario. And this is across the province, like the same feeling. So there's been a lot of correspondence back and forth with the minister. Even some of the developers are kind of going like. So the province did put a bit of a pause, as Chris mentioned, the OREGs, the Ontario regulations. It's kind of the real detailed things that come out of bills. We haven't seen those yet. So there's kind of hope that they're still listening and may kind of tweak those a bit. And they made one or two changes before they took their break at Christmas, and they're back in city now. The bill still hasn't received royal assent, so I'm not sure. There still may be some opportunity there. There's a very loud collective voice from municipalities on, okay, we'll work with you, but you got to look at this. And, you know, again, I'll say it, I think the electorate has to let their representative know as well if they're not satisfied.
Yeah, and I think what the situation is, most of the people I've heard from here and online, I think everybody understands the need for housing and nobody wants to see anybody out of the streets.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing we're seeing is that they talk that game at that level. And then the other side of it is they're getting money from the developers to change their plans. So I mean, yes, philosophically, we're with you.
Yeah.
But for money, as money and power goes, we're not with you. I mean, that's the dichotomy, really, isn't it?
It is.
That's all I'll say.
And honestly, for all municipalities to be expected to sort of take that charge up themselves is impossible. All three levels of government need to work on this issue in order to address it. There's no doubt.
Just to follow on from what Tim is saying, don't worry, I'm not expecting sympathy here for us, but at the municipal level, we are the tip of the spear, right? We're the ones implementing this. And so that we're the ones in the room with you. And we only have, our power is delegated to us. And so we only have a certain amount of authority to act within. And we do our best with that, but you know, we have limitations.
Yeah. To paraphrase something, Chris hit that in the nail. We're creatures of the province.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Maybe we chose it.
We'll just start in the back and work our way forward.
The lady in the back. Waiting for a while.
My concern is because it's gonna affect our lives for a long time. This little apartment building is going on here, it's on hold. It's gonna take 2 years if it's done this summer, I believe.
Mhm.
So we could have like for 10 years nonstop of the street was blocked. And you know, and I just don't understand why the city doesn't consider a place where there's a little bit less residents or the lot is more open generally, but the whole thing together, the big massive construction. And the woman, the present for woman, this place is being sold. I think there's going to be condo at the present for woman. This must have been an institutional lot. And I don't know, you know,
Yep.
so there is possibility, and there's a lot of institution around here where there would be big, wide, without affecting the population on their own and do something more beautiful with that complex to work with. And there's so really, you put a line on something that was already church, but the Cloverleaf put it to it just decide say let's put it there. Where's the Cloverleaf and something else? Because there is a big lot too, and there's like business, but it's business you could expand on top of it.
Yeah,
you know, and there's where's the
across from that, on St. Johnny, behind the boiler room, the old Randall. The boiler room, the AW, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Yellow on the map.
Mhm.
I don't know why.
Okay,
And the thing about, no,
No.
but it's all these big lots.
no,
To me, I don't know why we have to put it right beside the laws. I mean, when you look at other cities, usually they put these big intensification a little bit outskirts. And they think people are gonna take the bus. 1,000 people are gonna take that bus stop to come in and do their grocery, go to the YMCA, go to the daycare, go to the library, walk around in a nice neighborhood. It doesn't make sense to put that right in the middle of the city. Just because they can walk to Loblaw.
okay,
They should just go further where it doesn't stop the whole circulation for 10 years. For us anyway.
Yeah.
You
Got-
know,
you got-
and it makes something more beautiful, and they just take that bus stop and just come in town. We don't have to be all by the water, and they just gonna fly and go right by the water to the Olympic Harbor, the new beautiful complexes for the other two.
okay. So let me try to address some of your questions here. And I mean, I get where you're coming from. The piece where 7 and 11 are being built now. Once the sisters' residence was it was a large block of land. There's only one way to access it, and that was off of Wright Crescent, okay? So I don't think you're gonna see any infill development in and around where you're living. Beyond that. If you're gonna see development that takes place, it's gonna be on the periphery. We heard you in your comments about traffic infiltration on Wright Crescent.
And the drilling.
Yeah,
It's-
okay,
It's a lot of drilling.
I know it is, I know, I have experienced that.
Morning.
So you know, you're not gonna get. We're not gonna say, okay, here's a development over, they've got property that fronts onto John A, they can have their driveway come out on the right. No. And they're not gonna get construction access off of Wright if they're gonna build something out there, right?
They could. If they
No,
could.
they're not. No. Because we look at these,
Because you're gonna start by the front, accessing Wright Crescent.
no, because
Use it, do their 12, and then
We-
come closer.
there are things now that are in place, construction management plans where we can attach those and say, this is the way you're doing it, okay? To your question about larger parcels of land, the fact is the Kingston urban boundary, in other words, the land mostly south of the 401, take out the wetlands and the river. The developable area in Kingston, a low-lying fruit has been picked. There's not a lot of big open spaces left. Yes, you've referenced some, but they either do not permit residential or the people that own those properties
Yeah,
have decided not to build on them yet. There are plenty of sites in the city that have development approval on them, but whoever owns them has not decided to pull their permit yet, okay? The one I think you're referring to, Officer John A, which is part of the former Indicon site, which is a big yellow blot on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, but it's contaminated. So until they can figure out how to deal with that,
but why did they put it yellow? It's on the yellow map as.
it doesn't, because they can. It is the right place for residential, but there's still a matter of having to clean it up. As there is on many of the sites in the inner city and the inner harbor because of the coal tar. It happens, okay? My point being about the low-lying fruit being picked and not expanding, we can't anymore. If you expand, you got to expand roads, you got to expand the sewers. Where does that get funded from? Taxpayers, okay? Also, it's not good for the climate because all you're doing is encouraging people to get into the cars and drive further. You're not going to get bus service way out in Westbrook.
But if they don't have parking now, if they don't have parking right here, you're gonna take the bus.
But if people now are starting to make the decisions, moving into a building if there's not a place to park their car, they either find an alternative arrangement or they don't live there. Or they consciously know, I lived in a building for 6 years in Toronto and I didn't have a vehicle. I didn't need one. Because I was not downtown, I was midtown.
But exactly, it could be midtown north of the Crescent. Like nothing there, right in the middle, it's just so tight with such a big. So many people.
But I think, sorry, the point I'm trying to get is the areas where the city is going to get pressure to develop are infill sites or the brownfield sites, the former industrial sites. And they're the more challenging ones to deal with. Because when you get the infill sites, you're getting more into the compatibility criteria with your neighbors, right? Because all of a sudden you've got a building going up from what was a vacant lot before. And we've had lots of examples around here. It's just, there's nowhere else to expand within Kingston except within the land we have. And that's just a reality. It's either that or we stop growing.
So. About the Cloverleaf, couldn't they just decide to say, instead of going on Wright Crescent and it goes all around, and not make it longer and get a couple of lot more along Francis? Is it something, I just want to know.
It's something when, as part of the official plan review, the transportation plan is being done, they're being coupled together this time. So they will look at the road networks and things like that when we're bringing forward. So they're done in conjunction. But it'd be one document, not two separate documents. So that is something through that process, road connectivity and improvements where they can be made.
So that Cloverleaf area, it's not close enough to the bus stop? It's not enough central, is it what you're telling me?
No.
You're telling me then it could have been a facility.
I'm not, it depends what the current official plan designation is. And the Cloverleaf you're referring to is the one up at like Bath Princess, where that all joins there, where the former roundabout was.
Yeah, you're talking about the bowling alley?
Yeah.
The bowling alley? Yeah, so those lands, so those lands are within a commercial designation. The thing is, the city cannot force a property owner to develop lands. So even if there was residential permission, so the official plan does allow for residential uses within some commercial areas. However, the property owner would still need to go through some type of a planning application. So typically a zoning bylaw amendment application and also what we call a site plan application. However, it's up to the property owner to bring forward those applications. We can't force people to submit an application, even if we were upzoning an area. So for example, even for the 4 sites on Wright Crescent that we were looking at, the city could have changed the zoning, but if the property owner didn't want to do anything, we couldn't have forced them to develop the 12 or the 6 stories.
Enough because us too didn't say they want to sell.
Sorry,
So no one did say. I just don't know. I just don't know why you decide that this area would be the strategy. You kind of encouraging people to come and build there. Is the city is telling them that's the place. If you want to do intensification, you will have to be there, or could it be somewhere else?
There were various areas across the city that were identified. I think Chris went into that in his presentation.
Portsmouth and but
Yeah,
this is
and
no
Union.
because the people complain.
And then there are other development proposals. You say the prison for women site that come in, the owner came in on their own accord to develop there.
And now it's underway. Right?
So it was an institution, it's the government.
They went through an official plan and zoning amendment process.
So we could do the same thing with the building across the street, which is institutional. Why the city doesn't zone that part?
Sorry, which building?
it's
Just across from the
Prison for what? That's federally owned land. That's up to them.
But this was federally owned.
They sold
But we
it
sold
to
it.
Queens and Queens sold it to a private individual, like a private development corporation. It's no longer owned by the federal government or Queens.
So they sold it to Queens thinking they're gonna use it for education and they sold it to make money.
Yep.
So
That-
it's nice.
But that was their choice. And I mean, developers make money and they're allowed to. I mean, they're in it because it's a business. I mean, for the most part, obviously, but I mean, for good or bad, that's what it is, right? So I mean, that was a property that was sitting for very many years because it was quite complicated to figure out how to develop it. And you know, so now it's in a situation where it will go forward and there will be new development there.
Thank you. I just want to get some more time for some questions. I think we have some people over here that have been waiting for a while. Yourself?
I just thought that our parcel of land at 11 Wright Crescent building should have been a lot smaller. The trees and the parkland and the green space would have looked after itself if you hadn't let them build right to the damn sidewalk. It's hanging over the sidewalk. So where would you put a tree or a green space? You've got a whole building. The building should have been smaller for that parcel of land, in my opinion.
Just to follow on to that, how does the community get notified that that decision has been made by the city to have no setback? Like, there's no communication on that.
There is.
We didn't get any.
So if for a development application, you have to request the city to send you a notice of council's decision, and then you would be notified.
If
Or if
don't
you-
know that you need to do that, how do you?
Oh, so it's all included in the notice that's sent out with the complete application and the public meeting.
So if you just sent in an email saying, I'm interested, please keep me, please let me know when something happens with this. We have a list of interested parties that we then would send out the notice that we were required to, plus to all those people.
That's what's happening now, but going back to years ago, we were on the list for the city. We met down the library with a Toronto consultant talking about that property years and years ago, and we've been involved in keeping involved, but all of a sudden, there's no setback, and it just seemed to come out of the blue. I think it's just incumbent on the city to notify the neighborhood that this decision was made by the city
When,
and
Yeah.
how much money the city is getting for that piece of property.
when a development application goes through the public process, if you're with, as Security explained earlier, if you're within the 90 meters, 120, depending on the type of application, you're given written notice. There was also a signboard up around that whole perimeter with the details when the public meeting was being held. If you attended that public meeting, right, it then went on to a subsequent council meeting at which council would have approved it. And what they would have approved was what was presented in front of the planning committee.
Then it changed. But my question was, why does it go to
Okay.
the sidewalk?
So
You've left no room for trees
can I
or
kind of,
bushes.
we can't talk about past history, it's there, like.
But that's
it's-
what I'm saying, don't do it again.
And that's what we are here to avoid. So we can hash the stuff that happened. I can't tell you how it got there, and it's there.
It just goes back to, somebody made a comment about the trust issue. Like, we've got a pastor here tonight who didn't know anything about this development until I told him. The proposed development.
And we've taken the steps forward to make sure that we have created notification for all these people, which is an unusual step after the fact. Okay, we heard the message, we acted on it.
Yeah, and like I had said, the notification goes out to the property owner. So it's a possibility that if the property owner doesn't have the same address, the notification would have gone out to whatever address is included in impact. But yeah, we've taken this extra step of making sure that the notice is going to the property itself as well as the property owner, if the property owner resides at a different address. So yeah, we did hear that concern from like past CKGS meetings, and we made sure that.
Tim and Security, I'll just answer a question about communications. My name is Jen and I help lead the communications engagement team. And that's one of our jobs. Sorry, I'm also trying to talk to the individuals online and I feel like I'm living in two worlds right now. You said you couldn't hear me?
No.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Can't even hear in the front or now.
Okay.
We're
We're all learning how to do this again, getting together in person. So thank you. And I know the room is warm as well. So I've opened up some doors. On the communications side, that's one of the things that we're working really hard in the communications department to support Tim and his team. We hear you that not everyone has email, not everyone has a car, not everyone's on social media. So if there's communication specific questions, please make sure that you've added your email address there at the front. And that helps us reach you. We know email is not perfect. We try and layer in all of these other ways of reaching out. I'm also really mindful of the time. I want to try and help get through as many questions as possible. You've been so patient. I know. I see you. And everybody's like, I'm also patient. We have a couple of questions online. And because we're being hosted in a hybrid format, there are a couple of other online engagement sessions happening tonight and we all share the same Zoom account. So we'll need to wrap in order for other community members who are joining online. We have to wrap by 7. We have the comment cards there at the front door. I know it's not the same as in person. Like I said, we'll get through as many questions online, communication specific. Please leave your email address there and I commit to following up with you. And then I know Autumn's been keeping track of everybody here in person. If you've asked a question once and you still have your hand up, we're not purposely ignoring you. We're just going to try and get to somebody who hasn't had a chance to share their voice. Is that okay to move on? Okay, thank you. And if you need to stand up and stretch or anything, please do so.
Yeah, it's been really short. I attended a resident of the Kinsman Old Age Place. And I'm just wondering, since the green area across from us, the church, the only green area in that this entire place, are you so willing to give it up? Because we're not happy with that. None of us over there are. The amount of people, crime, traffic. I mean, we're a bunch of old people there. And most of us don't have cars. I don't have a cell phone. We're all on old age pension. We can't go anywhere. So it would be really nice if you found some little bit of something that can't be taken away before we all die amongst drilling.
Something with a can, like a little bit of corn for lifestyle.
I mean, I can respond to that. And it's probably more comment that the comment is just that the church is privately owned property. And so it's not going anywhere until they decide to. We're not going to, we as the city aren't taking away anyone's ability to access the property. It's entirely at the church's discretion whether they want to have folks on their land or not. But beyond that, from a development perspective, we don't have an active application from that. We've certainly heard loud and clear that you're concerned about the limited amount of open space in the area. And so if there is a development application on one of the parcels, it's certainly something we're going to be having a long, hard look at and act accordingly. I'm sorry, there's a lot of uncertainty there. I know it's just because we don't have hard answers to give you.
Yes. In your earlier slide, it mentioned building heights. I know when we did the Zoom meeting and the walkabout, we also mentioned types of buildings. So once a developer buys a piece of property, does the city have any influence on what type of housing it is, or is the developer just allowed to say, I want to have high because that's the best return? Do you have any influence on that?
The form of the building is very much dictated by the zoning and the density on the property. So that will basically determine the cap under the permitted zoning. it's not to say that they can't come in and say, well, I want an extra 2 floors. We'll review that under the compatibility criteria, how it affects shadowing, things like that. And I'm not just talking here, I'm talking across the city. And if it still meets good planning principles, and we would support it. But if they come in and say we want 24 stories because it's the only way this will work, it's like, sorry, we can't support that, okay? So it's very much driven by the planning process, the final form, but the official plan is the basis, sets the density, zoning bylaw sets the setbacks. We're trying to keep, within reason, the compatibility of the criteria, but again, you start pushing stuff to the edge of the neighborhood on arterials. Our official plan allows for higher heights and densities, okay? So that's built for. In terms of tenure, we have no say over it. We can't zone for tenure, we can't people zone. That's a human rights act.
So currently, it looks like it is going to be called buildings, and that is part of the zoning here, because everything we see.
I wouldn't say tall, I would say there's gonna be some increased height. I would say there's potential for some mid-rise.
Just to add on to what Tim is saying, obviously, like from our world, we look at the planning side of things. From the developer's world, they're looking at the cost of the land, right? And recouping the investment on the cost of the land. And in order to do that, you need to have more units. The more units you have, the better you're able to return on your initial investment in the land. So that's not our business. We don't need to care too much about their sheets, their spreadsheets, until it, interjects with the planning world. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the land value is not something that is just, in isolation. They're looking at all the properties around it, just like all of our own homes or units or whatnot are evaluated based on the comparables. And so the land value is going to be determined in part by the comparables they're looking at, and that is going to inform what kind of development they want to put in to recoup the money that they have to put into the land. And obviously then you have to look at all the other factors, like is it a contaminated site and all these other things. Those all together will work to inform the proposal that a developer is going to bring forward to us.
Yeah, just one simple question. Most buildings are there. Does the city have any control over the external appearance of the building? Because we're going to have to live here and look at it.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what the issue is, we do have a property standards bylaw, right? So if there is garbage strewn about, they're leaving garbage bins out, if the grass isn't getting cut.
Grass.
So Tim is mentioning then obviously on an ongoing basis from a maintenance perspective, there's property standards. From a development perspective, you've just heard, as we've mentioned, it's come up a couple of times that through Bill 23, we have as a city lost some of our ability to influence the architectural design of a building. But that, again, speak to your MPP.
The other thing is on your list of resident concerns, I think you can add the fact that we're going to be living in a construction zone for the next 20 years. Well, some of them I won't be, I don't think.
We're gonna take her question, then we'll come back to you. Yes.
I've heard somewhere, read somewhere that federal government is earmarked money for changing commercial properties into residential properties. And I'm just wondering how hard it would be if somebody here had a commercial property to change it, zoning to a residential, like, for example, the Canadian Tire, the perfect location. And how hard would that be if they were interested?
Okay, so I haven't heard anything about the funding for that. But in terms of the commercial property, I think it depends on the type of designation that's on that property. I think, as we said, this one across is a district commercial, so it's does not permit, the policies currently in the OP do not permit any residential. Okay.
Why is it so hard to change?
In that one, because it's district commercial, because it's a service center, it's got the the grocery store, and it's got the Canadian Tire, it's like the hub, if you will. I'm just paraphrasing here. You then have commercial properties, say along Princess Street, which are just commercial zoning, those do allow for residential development. But you still have to go through a rezoning. For something like across the street, they'd have to apply to amend the official plan. And that's a much more lengthy, detailed process, a little bit harder to justify.
Let's get on it.
Yeah.
That's what we're about to do.
Yeah.
That's the official plan update.
Yeah, we
But
are going to be.
And again, up to the property owner over there if they wish to entertain it. And I will tell you for a fact, when Canadian Tire came in with their new proposal, I asked them if they would consider putting residential above. And they looked at me like I was from the moon.
So just hear that again. We have asked people to do things to put in new housing and they have declined. So
They told me it's not in their model.
Who's told you that? Is that the developer?
the owner,
No, that came from Canadian Tire, direct. I said, this is a perfect location to put residential above. Yeah, I've seen it in Toronto, I've seen it in Vancouver,
Yes.
very successful model in Vancouver. Right across from Vancouver City Hall, as a matter of fact. So,
part of the issue there is that people stick to what they know, right? You've got some developers who build low density singles have been offered more density potential in other areas of the city and said, it's not what we do. No, thank you. And others, they do commercial and they don't want to do mixed use because they want to manage, they know their business and they do it well and it's profitable enough. And they don't need to have towers on top in order to make it work better. So you'll oftentimes see in areas where the land values are much higher, downtown cores of other areas, it only becomes feasible when you incorporate those other areas, depending on the business. But we can't tell people what to give us.
And I just wanted to add one thing on the commercial conversion. So we are also initiating what we call a commercial lands review. So that's a study that is a background study to our official plan, which reviews all commercially designated lands in the city. And then also through analysis makes recommendations around which lands are appropriate for conversion to a different designation. So that study, we are just about to start work on that study as well. So hopefully there will be something coming out of that work. And we do recognize there are lots of commercially designated lands in the city that are underutilized. So just like how can we encourage more mixed uses in those lands?
So, Randy, a question from yourself. I think you also had your hand up and then you.
Well, so from what I see, the lot that suggests across was way more space, you see the seller is not interested. The Crescent Tire, I guess you already questioned them because they're not interested. So that makes me believe, then then the church already interested there. And so I'm wondering, what are we doing here? Like you're here to listen to us, but the zoning is done. Whatever they're gonna do, you have no power. And you don't seem to consider, you don't want to move somewhere where you're affecting less people, because it does affect us. And it's a big construction, it's massive. But I don't see from the city any way they wanna consider anything else. And it's like a done deal to me.
no, I sorry, politely disagree. I think the city is looking across the city for areas to intensify. I can name you half a dozen sites where we're currently doing that. I will also say that I think it was quite clear during the presentation, there is nothing to stop any one of the 4 property owners right now, if they chose to come in and apply to build residential. They have the right to do that. So part of what we're doing here to you is updating you that there's nothing going on there because there's rumors out there. That if they do come in, it will have to go through a process. You will be involved. If nothing goes on those properties before we bring forward the new official plan may look at some different policies for those lands or the ones across the street, which may allow for some form of intensification. So it's not a done deal.
Yeah, and just to add to that, even if we change the policies or the zoning, it would be up to the property owner to bring forward the development. So it doesn't mean that something may happen right away. It would be totally up to the owner. Thank you.
I did want to speak to the rezoning of commercial, but that's sort of an answer. But what I can say is that the Kingston Alliance has absolutely no intention of selling. They're really well established. They do a thing for homeless people there. They just, when the pastor heard this was going on, he said, we're not.
No, and that's to Secreti's point. We can't force them
Just
to,
let
but
people know that that's one property that is not.
I've also seen properties though owned by places of worship where they will come in and with a proposal to say, yes, we want to keep our church, but we want to build some seniors housing on our property. So that might be a form of development you may see on the property. I don't know. There's always something possible, but it's at the end of the day, it's up to the property owner. Okay, we cannot force them to build anything.
May I just interrupt for a moment? So we are at time for the online portion. Let Tim, Secreti, and Chris decide if they are welcome to keep answering questions in person. Can you just say good evening to our online attendees?
Thanks for coming.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
And again, for the folks online, if you didn't have a chance, please contact us by email.
Happy holidays.
I think you've been waiting
So
for a
for
while.
all of our online attendees, this is Jen wishing you a pleasant evening. A recording will be available online on YouTube later on this evening. And if you would like to receive project updates, please email ckstrategy@cityofkingston.ca. Thank you to everyone who took time to join us this evening. And I wish you a pleasant and safe afternoon. Bye-bye.
Building more houses. Is that